We've got a record. We've got a record number of folks registered for our webinar today, and we're really happy to see all of you. We'll probably start a few minutes late, just because we're trying to get everybody in, and we did have a couple of people I think got bum links, so Jackie's straightening that out for us. So if you'll just be a little patient, we will get started as soon as we can. We'll see, we have folks that are from other denominations and all different parts of the state. And friends of people who are in all kinds of congregations. So that's wonderful. I'm so glad that this is being widely viewed, and we are recording it for use here in our conference. And also our guests tell us that that they may use the recording in other parts of the country, in other conferences as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are interested in this topic, so I'm glad to see the good turnout, and we'd be happy to share the recording out from our office.
That's great. Thank you.
It's great to see folks putting their information in the chat, what church they're from. See some familiar faces.
Deb, now that I'm on, I can help with admitting people. I would say let's go ahead.
Okay, we thought we'd just wait until 5:35, and we will then go ahead. We're up to 71, it looks like.
There we go.
It's pretty impressive, but we had over 100 people register for today.
117.
117. Wow.
Sorry to let everyone know that Taylor Swift is not, in fact, opening up for us. Sorry to disappoint. Hopefully everyone can still stay on.
Was that a rumor you got started?
Yeah, we're hoping to pump up the numbers, so
right.
It worked.
Very good. Yeah, that's right. Well, unfortunately, her endorsement of one of the candidates didn't work out quite as we had hoped. Yes. So maybe she doesn't have quite as much influence as we think.
Right.
Laura's still streaming in, which is great. We're going to start in just 45 seconds or so. Everybody, welcome. A steady stream.
Want to say hi to Reverend Lynn Bunyak, who's here from the conference office.
Yes.
Hi, Michael. So glad you're with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Alrighty. Well, why don't we go ahead? I think we've got most people in, and probably a few others will continue to stream in. I am Reverend Debbie Ingram, and I'm chair of the Vermont Conference's Justice and Witness Ministries Committee. And as I said, we're so pleased to see so many of you here today. The JWM committee is a band of hearty souls from all over the state who meet monthly to learn about and share with others what our conference congregations are doing in the realm of social justice. And we have a special emphasis on racial, environmental, and global justice. So today we have with us Reverend Michael Neuroth, who serves as the Director of the Office of Policy and Advocacy for the national setting of the UCC. Mike has worked for the World Council of Churches, Church World Service, Ecumenical Advocacy Days, and the Parliament of the World's Religions. He holds master's degrees in divinity, theology, and social work from Princeton Seminary and Rutgers University. And with him is Abigail Cipparone, who serves as the domestic policy advocate for the UCC national setting. She previously worked as the legislative director for Congressman Kwesi Mfume of Maryland's 7th Congressional District. Abigail holds a bachelor's degree in ethnicity, race, and migration from Yale University. Michael and Abigail and their colleagues are responsible for the document Countering Project 2025 with Love, a UCC response. And we're very happy to have them with us today. So I will turn everything over to Michael and Abigail.
Well, thank you, Reverend Ingram, and just so happy to be with all of you in the Vermont Conference. We bring you greetings, certainly from our office here in Washington, D.C. If you didn't know, we have an office right across from our nation's capital, right next to the Supreme Court in what is known as the United Methodist Building. So we are right here in the heart of things. We have an office on the 3rd floor, and you are welcome here anytime you're in the area, either doing vacationing here in Washington doing tourist stuff, or would like to come and advocate with us. We are your place here on Capitol Hill. We are fighting the fight here in the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. And so we bring greetings from our office, both Abigail and I, as well as our colleagues here who cover a variety of many different issues, as well as bringing greetings from the national setting of the United Church of Christ and our General Minister and President, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson. Most of tonight is obviously focused on Project 2025, and Abigail is going to lead us through kind of our office's analysis of that, its comparison to, our analysis of Project 2025, its comparison to our UCC values, and how the current administration is living into its plans, as well as at the end, I'm going to speak about our response to what the administration is doing. As Debbie prefaced, we put out this resource back in the fall, while at the same time we were also rolling out our office's Our Faith, Our Vote campaign. And really, we felt like we saw that this document was going to be the playbook for this, what might become this next administration, which has now come to pass. And the values that it represented really run so counter to our values as the United Church of Christ. And so we use the framing of countering it with love, in some ways a nod to our own Love is Louder campaign as the United Church of Christ. But as we've been hearing about the devastation and the cruelty of what this administration has been doing and how it has been living into that to the Project 2025 agenda, we here in DC have also been comparing what Project 2025 stands for with what our values are as the UCC and as articulated in the Bible verse of Matthew 25. So I think if you take nothing else away from this, I encourage you, and we know that passage well, but certainly, in Matthew 25, when in the parable Jesus shares, I was a stranger and you did not welcome me, naked and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison and you did not visit me. Those are the values that we stand for, providing shelter, providing welcome, providing for the basic needs of most vulnerable in our communities. And so we want to shed a light on Project 2025 based on our values of Matthew 25. So At the end of the webinar, I'm going to be speaking a bit about kind of what we're doing to counter, but I really wanted to turn it over now to Abigail to really share kind of the plan itself, as well as how those values are juxtaposed to ours in the UCC. So Abigail, take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone, and good to meet you. I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along as we go through this here. There we go. Yeah, so I'm going to be mainly giving a summary on how Project 2025 is currently being implemented by the Trump administration and Congress, and speaking to those UCC values and how those two are juxtaposed. And then I'll let Mike wrap up with what we are doing about it and how you all can help us. So Project 2025 is a compilation of radical policy proposals, as well as a presidential transition project that was launched by the Heritage Foundation. And these policies threaten basic freedoms, punish the most vulnerable, and dismantle the structure of our federal government, all while attacking religious freedom and the separation of church and state. Most importantly, Project 2025 stands in direct opposition to the United Church of Christ's values and work. And unfortunately, just over the last few months, we've seen the Trump administration and Congress aligning with this document as they implement their 2025 policy agenda. So this is just a little bit more information about Project 2025. Over 100 organizations authored it, over $10 million was spent, and its central policy playbook, which is called the Mandate for Leadership, is over 900 pages long. So Project 2025 addresses this list of issues and many more. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go through every single part of Project 2025. So I'm really going to focus on the main points from each of these issues and speak to really what our UCC values and what our General Synod resolutions say about each of the issues and how Project 2025 treats them. So on immigration and refugee issues, as you have probably seen, the Trump administration's actions is basically directly maps onto what the Project 2025's directives are, which in general is allowing ICE to raid schools, hospitals, and churches, deploying the military to the border, ending the refugee and asylee admission programs, as well as reinstituting the Remain in Mexico policy, which forces asylum seekers to await the processing of their case in Mexico. The Trump administration has also begun to implement its plan to mass deport and detain undocumented immigrants, regardless if they have committed a crime. And as we all know, these are all in direct violation of our faith values as part of the United Church of Christ. We have dozens of resolutions that reaffirm the dignity and human rights of immigrants and welcome and express love and welcome and hospitality towards immigrants, regardless of their immigration status. And the mass deportation and detention of our neighbors, as well as ending the refugee and asylum programs as the Trump administration has done, and the further militarization of the border is in direct violation of these values of dignity and love. So with relation to the climate, Project 2025 calls for the shredding of regulations to curb greenhouse gas pollution and the dismantling of almost every clean energy program in the federal government. It also calls for the boosting of the production of fossil fuels, which, as we all know, is the chief cause of planetary warming. Project 2025 also calls for the disbandment of NOAA, which focuses on our weather and our oceans, as well as withdrawing from international climate agreements, including the Paris Climate Agreement. One of the most concerning directives within Project 2025 is dismantling the endangerment finding, which is a statement that greenhouse gas emissions pose a threat to public health and welfare, which has allowed the EPA to regulate emissions under the Clean Air Act. And unfortunately, the Trump administration's, sorry about that. The Trump administration's actions have really aligned with Project 2025's directives. So the Trump administration has cut EPA staff by 60%, including thousands of national park and national forest staffs, and all interagency work on reducing emissions has ceased. The now head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, has spoken publicly about prioritizing ending the endangerment finding. They've also paused the disbursement of funds for clean energy programs and ended the electric vehicle subsidy through the federal government. And then most recently, the Interior Secretary's orders have made public lands ground zero for drilling and mining. And then in addition to this, President Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, as well as there's been staff cuts and attempts to dismantle NOAA. So this is in direct violation of United Church of Christ values, mainly because we have a number of synod resolutions that call on our churches to prioritize addressing the climate crisis, and specifically to become carbon neutral by 2040, as well as to prioritize environmental justice initiatives. And so the actions by the Trump administration in line with Project 2025 really violates those faith values. So for foreign policy, as we know, the UCC is a just peace denomination, which is committed towards working towards peace and justice at home and abroad. And we believe that loving your neighbor includes the provision of humanitarian aid for the needs of others. We believe that working together with other countries can help achieve these goals and help achieve God's kingdom on earth. But unfortunately, Project 2025 has directed the State Department to focus on America first, to punish countries that fail to accept deportees, and has also within Project 2025, they criticize the World Health Organization, they recommend the dismantling of USAID, and all of this is in line with what the Trump administration has currently done. First, there is an executive order that directed the State Department to adopt an America First foreign policy. The Trump administration created a trade standoff with Colombia over their refusal to take deportees. They removed the US from the World Health Organization and unfortunately removed the US from a number of international bodies, including the UN Human Rights Council, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine. They cut the staff budget and closed the offices of the US Agency for International Development. Most recently, actually, even today, the staff at USAID were given 15 minutes in DC to get all of their items out of their desks and leave. And then they've also begun the review of the US's involvement in the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So under education, Project 2025 has a lot to say, but I'm going to focus on just a few main points. It has dictated that the Head Start program is a waste of resources. The Head Start program provides early child care for low-income children, and it recommends the defunding of the federal school meal program, as well as the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. It also phases out Title I funding and abolishes sexual education and critical race theories in schools. So these are all the recommendations from Project 2025. And then one of the biggest ones is they recommend a redistribution of federal funding towards private schools, which their argument is that it creates more school choice. And the Trump administration's initial actions, as well as congressional actions, has fallen in line with this. So first, the freezing of federal funding by the Trump administration has triggered the closure of many Head Start programs. So while the actual Head Start program hasn't actually been dismantled, it currently has been very hampered because of the federal funding issues. Congress is also currently considering a reconciliation bill, which is a big budget bill that they're planning on passing, that would put at risk the federal school meal program. And then the Trump administration recently released an executive order expanding school choice, which basically provides more public funding for private schools. And they released another executive order, quote unquote, abolishing critical race theory in schools. So really trying to kind of fulfill the directives that were laid out in Project 2025. And our UCC values here are clear, right? As a people that's called to love our neighbor as ourselves, we're called to protect and improve public schools as a matter of justice. We have a number of resolutions, particularly investing in public education. And then the UCC also is one of two denominations that runs the Our Whole Lives curriculum, which is focused on a whole life approach to sexual education, and that includes sexual education for children and young adults. And so when we look at the attempts to dismantle public schools, to weaken them, to hurt particularly already low-income children, those are in direct violation of our UCC values. So for LGBTQ rights, Project 2025 really focuses on defunding trans healthcare, and in general, they have a number of directives focusing on guidance that defines gender or sex as a fixed biological fact. And the Trump administration has fallen in line with that. First, they prohibit on one executive order, they have prohibited the provision of gender-affirming care to trans youth by federally owned facilities. They also have prohibited trans people from being members of the military. They have ended the federal discrimination protection of trans people. And they've prohibited the creation of government IDs. So that's like passports, driver's licenses that indicate a gender that is other than what was assigned at birth. They've also ended the data collection on gender identity and all agency work on gender and sexual identity, both that are goals of Project 2025. And finally, there was an executive order that came out just after the inauguration that basically defined gender and sex as a fixed fact, as just male or female. So this is in violation of UCC values, mainly because the UCC has supported and advocated for LGBTQ rights for years. Particularly, we have a number of resolutions that support human rights and dignity related to sexual orientation and gender identity. And we have affirmed the dignity and the human worth of our transgender and non-binary siblings in 2023. And so any attempts to really oppress any person in the United States, regardless of their gender or their sexuality, violates the UCC's fundamental commitment towards a just world for all as well. For economic justice, Project 2025 focuses on really two main things. First, dismantling and hampering the work of labor unions, as well as changing our tax code to make it more in line with, first, advantaging the ultra wealthy and putting a lot more of the tax burden on middle income earners. So these goals are harder to complete in the short term because a lot of them rely on congressional action. But what the Trump administration has done so far is it has released an executive order that basically raises the standard for how unions gain official recognition. They also, an executive order allows basically was rescinded that originally was an NLRB decision that allowed, that prohibited employees from being required to sit through anti-union rallies during the workday. Now that decision has been rescinded, employees are now or can be required to sit through anti-union rallies when they're at work. And then Congress's tax plan, which is included in this big budget bill that I've already mentioned, is unfortunately still moving forward. The House budget resolution just passed. And so they are heavily considering cuts to taxes on both estate income as well as tax cuts for the ultra wealthy. And so that also falls in line with Project 2025's directives. So UCC values on economic justice are focused on pursuing a just economy, which is defined in our resolutions as progressive taxation, guaranteed healthcare, labor protections and solidarity, as well as affordable housing and the establishment of reparations. And there's also within our resolutions a definition of what collective thriving is, and that comes through ensuring all are robustly paid and protected at work and given ample rest from labor. And then there's also throughout our resolutions and throughout the work of the UCC, there's an understanding that we must equitably steward our resources and share our resources in service of meeting human needs and human rights. And so when we speak to a tax code that preferences the ultra wealthy, when we think about the dismantling of labor unions, those two are both in violation of UCC values. So for healthcare, Project 2025 focuses on some Medicaid and Medicare reforms that they propose. So they propose work requirements for Medicaid, and they propose time limits on how long people can be on Medicaid. They talk about, there's this conversation in the Project 2025 playbook that speaks to this whole like cradle to grave welfare state, right? And they want to dismantle this welfare state. And one of the ways to do that is to put a time limit on the amount on how long people can use Medicaid, which of course brings up a lot of faith values issues for us. Primarily, work requirements on Medicaid would make it much harder for the disabled community, as well as children, as well as elderly, to take advantage of the program. And the idea of a time limit on how long people can be on Medicaid is really against this value of understanding that healthcare is a human right and should be prioritized for all people. And that value has been held by the UCC for more than 40 years. The Project 2025 also proposes to increase drug prices for Medicare Part D and rescinds the ability and suggests rescinding the ability for Medicare to negotiate drug prices. It also proposes addressing the opioid overdose crisis through increased sentencing and the closing of the US border. And so, again, this is one where the Trump administration has less say and it's more a congressional issue. But unfortunately, there has been some work being done in Congress to move forward with particularly cuts and attacks on Medicaid. Most recently, just this week, the House budget resolution passed, which was a big step towards this big budget bill that I keep mentioning. And it unfortunately passed with proposed cuts of almost $880 billion from the Medicaid program. And so that would severely debilitate the program. We currently don't know what that means, but our understanding is work requirements are definitely on the table, time limits are definitely on the table, and they're working out the details. There was also, the Trump administration released an executive order that rescinded the Biden administration initiative that had directed the health secretary to explore ways of lowering pharmaceutical costs within Medicare. This did not directly end the ability for Medicare to negotiate drug prices, but what it did do is, while it allowed the 15 drugs that are currently getting negotiated by Medicare to keep their prices low, it allowed those to go forward. It put at risk any future drugs that could be negotiated by Medicare. And so this, of course, is also against the UCC values of access to affordable, safe, and high-quality healthcare, and our belief that we must heal and not criminalize the sick, regardless of those that are, if that's people who are struggling with substance abuse or people who are in our Medicaid or Medicare systems. And then for racial justice, Project 2025 really focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and calls for the abolition and the really dismantling of all DEI programs and initiatives across the federal government. It also has a kind of strong conversation surrounding identity politics and dismantling the symbols of, quote, identity politics. And then it even goes so far as to suggest the prosecution of schools, institutions, and even private entities like private companies that continue implementing DEI initiatives. So this one has, I think, gotten a lot of press, but we've seen throughout the federal government that since the Trump administration has taken over, they have basically gotten rid of every single diversity, equity, and inclusion office and program and initiative within all federal agencies. They've also prohibited the flying of Black Lives Matter or rainbow flags at US embassies, and an executive order was released that directed the Department of Justice use all of its resources and full prosecutorial powers to prosecute schools, institutions, and even private entities that continue implementing DEI initiatives. And what's really unfortunate about this has created a chilling effect where private companies that we shop at regularly, such as a Walmart or a Target, have rolled back their DEI initiatives out of fear of this administration. And while we have also seen the other side, where there are some companies that have courageously had votes with their shareholders, and their shareholders have kept their DEI initiatives, this is a huge threat to the UCC's commitments as an anti-racist church, which the UCC became an anti-racist church in 2003 and committed to examine both historic and contemporary forms of racism and its effects. And so the erasure and the lack of care for our people of color siblings is something that is a direct violation of UCC values. And then, of course, the UCC has also voted to mandate diversity, equity, and inclusion training for authorized ministers. So this hits home for us. The UCC, as a national setting itself, has DEI programming that is really important to uphold. And then our final topic is reproductive rights. So Project 2025 calls for the defunding of Planned Parenthood, and then it kind of generally calls for the criminalization of traveling for abortions and abortions by mail. And then it also puts at risk, there's a discussion about maybe insurance shouldn't cover contraception as well. So the Trump administration so far has stopped all agency efforts to protect patient and provider privacy and security related to the provision of abortion. This was a big priority of the Biden administration that has been rolled back. They also rescinded the right for military service members to use leave, so to use their vacation time to travel for abortion care. And they released an executive order that is actually a pretty common one that basically every Republican administration has released in the past that prohibits international NGOs that receive US government funding from using their own money to provide information, referrals, or services for legal abortion. And so since 1971, actually, the United Church of Christ has supported the right of each person to follow their own personal religious and moral convictions regarding the completion or termination of a pregnancy. And so having the government weigh in on whether you can terminate or continue with your pregnancy is fundamentally against UCC resolutions. And then in 2023, the UCC proclaimed abortion as healthcare and forced birth as an act of violence, and called for systemic measures to increase access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care. And so I know that was a lot of information that I went through really fast, and so I'm sure folks have questions, so I'm happy to take them at the end. But I wanted to pass the baton over to Mike to talk about how our office is fighting Project 2025 as it is getting implemented here in DC.
Yeah. First off, thank you, Abigail, for the work that she's been doing, both in tracking Project 2025 and currently tracking what the Trump administration is doing in as our domestic policy advocate is just fantastic work, as you can see from this presentation. How we are pushing back, how we are fighting back, really that takes on a couple different characteristics. I would say first and foremost, we as an office, and I would encourage all of you in how you consider how you can push back and address these challenges, is to lean into our faith. This is a moment to lean into the values, our UCC values that Abigail just shared as articulated through our General Synod resolutions, is lived out and experienced in our local churches and our traditions. Like, now's the time to deepen our commitment, to remind ourselves of what we believe, why we believe it, and then to speak out of those values. So that is kind of a snippet of what you just saw happen in this moment, as well as to lean into partnerships, right? A lot of the strategy of this moment is to divide communities, to alienate communities and individuals and isolate them. And so now, as a strategy for our office, we're leaning into our faith. We're also leaning into our interfaith and ecumenical partnerships. So we're doing a lot more strategizing as bigger, circles of offices, and I meet with the heads of many of those offices here in Washington. So we are really thinking and planning and strategizing more together. Now's the time to come together and to speak out boldly and to show up often. And so I put in the chat several different links that I encourage you to check out. First and foremost, we need to be flooding our congressional offices and the administration with our protests, our opinions, our thoughts, our anger. We hear stories from congressional offices. We had a meeting earlier this week with congressional office, and you can just see the intensity of this moment in those offices. They're feeling the frustration from folks. They're getting it in their town halls. They're getting flooded many, many times over, with emails and calls. And we have ways to do that as the United Church of Christ. So our UCC Justice and Peace Action Network is an action center where you can send a message to your member of Congress. It's one of these, e-advocacy tools. We send a new message each week. And we are right now leaning into this moment by oftentimes putting out multiple actions each week. So sometimes we'll do a call script each day or every other day. We're doing, sometimes emergency alerts. So I really encourage you to sign up for the Justice and Peace Action Network and to share that with your church. Encourage them to join and to take weekly action with us. We also are compiling those actions plus many different ways in which we are responding to this moment with a new webpage we're calling Resources for the First 100 Days. So that we are highlighting those actions that we are putting out, as well as sign-on statements that we are signing on to as an office, news articles of our work and that of our other national ministries that are addressing this moment. At the top, you'll see a link for local churches to share stories with UCC News of ways in which they are showing up in their communities. We've been in touch with congregations all over the country who are witnessing, on their church block, trying to show that what they stand for in this moment. And those kind of, moments of public witness are important. But, I would ask for you to consider to combine those with advocacy, right? We can stand out there with our signs, and that may have an impact there locally at raising awareness and showing solidarity, but we need to put pressure on members of Congress right now to exert their Article 1 authorities to push back on the administration that is overstepping its mandate. Another way in which we are showing up in this moment, next week, starting on Ash Wednesday, our office is co-sponsoring a weekly, what we're calling Faithful Witness Wednesdays. In some ways, looking at the model of the Poor People's Campaign and the Moral Monday movement, we're going to be gathering with our interfaith partners on the lawn of the Capitol or right across the street every week at noon to offer a faithful voice in the midst of this chaos, to push back on what's happening. And finally, there are a lot of other ways in which the national ministries are responding. There's Join the Movement that's being organized by our racial justice minister. There's a new climate campaign affiliate program that Brooks Barrett, our environmental justice minister, is organizing. There's a new economic justice podcast that Seth Wispelway is organizing. There are many different ways in which the UCC is responding. And one way to, certainly UCC News is an important source to keep up on what's happening, but I'll also highlight our JPNet newsletter that we put out each month. And I put the link there in the chat that will also allow you to kind of help track all the many different things that our office is doing, as well as the wider ministries.
Mike, I'm sorry, I'm just interrupting. It sounds like your sound went down a little bit. Can you?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know when I cut out. You know what?
Just raise it higher.
Yeah,
Okay.
you didn't cut out. You just dropped
faded
in
down.
volume.
Oh, sorry.
That's better. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So just the last point I was making is about our office newsletter, which we put out on a monthly basis, that really tries to compile actions justice actions that are being taken across the life of the church, as well as other events, resources, toolkits that folks might be interested in. So all of that is there. Those links are in the chat for you to consider. I think we open up for question and answer at this point.
Terrific. Yes. So we want to kind of keep this organized. And let me first of all say thank you so very much. Abigail, that your charts are really impressive, and Michael, thank you so much for all those options, so that we feel like we have a way to make an impact. And yeah, so definitely we want to open up for questions. Jackie Lingelbach and I will be sort of running traffic. So if you want to use the raise hand function, that would be fine, or you can write in the chat. Who would like to go first?
Don't be shy.
So we have one. Our Vermont legislators last night showed that they think like we do. They had we only have one representative, one Congress person, and then of course the two senators, and they did have a town hall last night. So the question is, how do we go beyond Vermont? Because yeah, that's a common problem here in Vermont. You know, our folks agree with us, but how do we reach other people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one way to think about that, you're fortunate in that your values do align with your members of Congress. That is not the case in many places. So one thing you might consider, and Abigail, if you have some ideas as well, but certainly reaching out to friends, family members in other states to really encourage them to raise their voice is one way that I think you can use your time well by kind of reaching out beyond Vermont and sharing your thoughts, sharing your encouragement, sharing the resources that you find with them. And really, this is one of those moments where we have to take that awkward step of asking things of each other, asking folks to make the calls. We as an office, we've had, as many of you know who've been around for years, you've probably seen the Justice of Peace Action Network emails that have gone out. You've heard us talk about it from national. Now's the time not only to really take that seriously, but also to go beyond that and make the phone calls that we are calling on folks to make, because that is what is making a difference. And certainly members of Congress really primarily do pay attention to their constituencies, but it doesn't hurt to call others as well. That, it's not like they won't log the number. Like they'll pay attention. They won't listen to you as close as they will their own constituents, but you certainly can raise your voice with other members too. But Abigail?
Yeah, I'll just briefly add that I think it's really great when you have members that share your values, and that doesn't mean that it's not valuable to ask things of them, right? I think particularly recently, I've been doing work with some churches that have benefited off of solar panels that they received through the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed a few years ago. And they got a clean energy tax credit to put in solar panels. And they have a friendly member that is friendly to the environment. And, they asked that member to lead a bipartisan letter in support of clean energy tax credits. And, that member said yes. And so now there's going to be a bipartisan letter that's sent up to the leadership in Congress in support of clean energy tax credits. And so even if your member might be aligned in your values, that doesn't mean that you can still hold them to a very high standard and ask that they use their position to advocate for those values when they're in Congress, whether that be lead bipartisan letters or bipartisan coalitions or fight for legislation that really matters to you. So just know that it's still impactful work speaking to friendly members.
Great, thank you. So looks like Letitia Scordino has a question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Letitia Scordino, and I'm from Manchester, Vermont. And I heard of your Zoom through my friend today. She said, "Oh, they're part of the church in Rupert, Vermont. It's a very small church. I don't know if you know it." Anyway, I'm doing a reading of Project 2025. I am attempting. It's 955 pages. A lot of it is, waste of time. But I'm not reading the whole book. But we're summarizing. Years ago in Vermont, the playwright from Berkeley did a play called "It Can't Happen Here." And we did it all over the United States to raise awareness of what was going to happen. This is pre Trump's first term. Then, when Robert Mueller had his report, a group of actors read, and it's very impactful. And people really pay attention when you have something like that happening. And this is what I want to do. So I wanted I wanted a copy of Abigail's her slides. And do you know of anyone doing a reading like I'm doing in Manchester, Vermont? You heard of this?
No, I haven't personally heard of readings, but I think that's a really great and creative idea. And yeah,
I mean,
I'm
it'd
happy to share my slides. I will say, as you can,
Thank you.
some
I
of
mean, we'll
these
be reading the sections, we'll have rebuttals, and then I'm not opening it up to the public because I don't want problems. But it's for us to embolden us, we the resistance, and that's why I'm doing it. So if you get any ideas, Abigail, I gave you my number.
Sure.
Because it's hard job. It's humongous. So
Yeah.
I'm happy
thank
to
you.
help.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Debbie, I saw
Uh,
a few questions in the chat I'd be happy to address real quick.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah, so I saw the question about who are our interfaith partners. I put a link there in the chat. That is a link to a website called the Washington Interfaith Staff Community. So that is the network of other faith groups that we partner with on a regular basis. We have a lot of leadership in the interfaith community here on the Hill, and that gives you it's a group of about 75 different faith organizations spanning both, Christian, Protestant, Catholic. So many of the Catholic religious orders are very active. All the mainline Protestant denominations, Jewish partners, Muslim partners. We have a new Buddhist organization that's part. So it's a really robust faith coalition. I also saw a question about the Faithful Witness Wednesday and doing that on the state level. I wanted to answer that because I literally was on a planning meeting at noon today about those witnesses. And right now there's no organizing structure for that to happen yet, but it was discussed today that there may be the interest in doing so. And so I'm really glad to hear indeed that that you thought of that and that there might be an appetite and interest in doing so to see how we might offer some materials or resources to replicate this on the state level. Interestingly, there is another, some of you may know the Repairers of the Breach, Bishop William Barber. That is also happening on the Hill that day. They have a moral march from 10:30 to 12. And so some of the state repairers networks or Poor People's Campaign networks probably are going to be doing similar actions on the state level. I also saw a question about kind of boycotting social media accounts and Tesla, Amazon. We haven't had those conversations about particularly boycotting those companies. I certainly understand why folks are raising that at this time, seeing I would say the unholy alliance or the connections that are happening between kind of the oligarchs, those companies that stood behind this president on Inauguration Day, and kind of therefore endorsing this agenda, and these companies that are so prominent in our nation. I would say to the question of the social media, we have not. So we haven't decided to do any boycotts at this moment on those companies for this reason. There are other boycotts against companies on other basis, on Israel-Palestine issues and others. But on the particular question of social media, I know lots of folks have left Twitter and have moved to Blue Sky and other social media platforms. We as an office have decided to stay, really just to maintain our presence there, to try to ignore the toxicity that's happening, but really to not cede the space to the extremist voices, the Christian nationalist voices, and others who would welcome us leaving. And so we've made that decision now. Everyone can make a different decision for themselves, but that's been our decision for today.
Great. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Abigail, did you have something to add?
No, I was gonna go ahead and answer a question that was in the chat from Carrie Freiberg on how do I get my politically diverse members to agree on our message. That's a very, that's a difficult question, but I'll just weigh in here and say that I think that where we have found the most success with particularly working with more conservative religious folks is centering Jesus, right? Centering Jesus's teachings, centering Jesus's life. I think that there is sometimes in congregationalist spaces a fear of centering Jesus, but Jesus is where everything comes from and wherever everything will come from. I think particularly Jesus's teachings on loving your neighbor, on hospitality, on feeding the hungry and tending to the sick is teachings that we have really tried to focus on when it comes to our work and putting our faith values in the context of what is currently happening in our society. So I'll let Mike weigh in and if he has other advice, but that's just what came to mind for me.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe we can move to some of the raised hands. I think
Sure.
we have several now. So Fred Taylor, start with you. He's a member of our JWM group.
Yeah, well, thank you so much to both of you for this great presentation, and Abigail especially for the details with which you've laid out the different issues. And my question is really about all the huge number of issues that are facing us. And in our conversations in the Justice Witness Ministries group, one of the things that often comes up is the way everything is intertwined. We've talked about it as like the intersectionality of these issues. And I find when I'm thinking about this that that's both overpowering but also empowering, because when we see how climate change, environmental destruction, racial justice, world hunger, world justice issues are all interconnected, it somehow gives us a leverage points that we don't have if we're just looking at one issue. But it's also just incredibly difficult to, figure out what kinds of actions can help to address things on such a large scale. So I guess if either of you have any thoughts about how that intersectionality of these issues can be a source of inspiration rather than of overwhelm, would be really helpful for me anyway, and maybe for others too.
Go ahead, Abigail. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think our witnessing of attacks on really every every person in America who's not a billionaire. I think the beauty of that is that that's true unity, right? I think that we find unity in understanding that our place in this world is connected to the person next to us and the person after that and the person after that and nature and trees and I think that as you said, right, like the very intersectionality of these issues makes it so that we have so much opportunity to be unified against oppression. And I think that's where I find a lot of hope, right? I think what the Trump administration is doing, what Project 2025 is trying to do, is it tries to pit people against each other, but it does so by creating suffering for everyone. And if there's suffering for everyone, that also means that everyone has something to work on together, right? And everyone has something to invest in together. And I think that the unity that I've seen in the last, even in just in the last few weeks, in opposing threats to our Constitution and opposing threats to our democracy has given me a lot of hope that regardless of where we are coming from our political viewpoints, we are going to unify around the values of love and around the values of human dignity. So I think that's what's given me hope.
Yeah, I'll only add, as a UCC, our values are themselves holistic. You look at our just peace pronouncement, it is rooted in the concept of shalom, the peace with justice. We look at, statements that we've had on supporting the common good. Really, it's not only is it an effective strategy, but it's a strategy that gives life and brings life. So I know we've got lots of questions and not much time left, so let me stop there.
Okay, great. So Paul Grenier, please go ahead and ask your question. I think you have to unmute yourself first, though.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just kind of curious. I know one of my parishioners the other, I think this was January, was looking for resources on the website, and all they came across at that time was the Courageous Conversations from 2021 or 22. Uh, and I don't know how to ask this or if this is the appropriate venue, but uh, is what is the majority of churches that you're hearing from? How are the ministers handling it? Is the stance, like the stance I think for a while has been, you may have left and right in your congregation, let's come together and have conversations about these difficult issues and try to find commonalities. Has that shifted to, yeah, this is something we really need to stand up for? The question also applies to like sermons and things like that, as opposed to kind of walking that tight line to moving over the edge, if you will. I'm not quite articulating myself, but I'm wondering if you've gotten any sense of that from the churches that you've interacted with.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I think that, first off, we approach this work in a nonpartisan way as the United Church of Christ, and yet our values, as articulated through General Synod, that is the basis upon which we use our voice, and that does have some alignment in kind of in terms of what bills and things we support here, and those bills themselves tend to adhere themselves to a certain political party. But we do not. We often push back across the aisle on both sides, calling on both parties, both chambers, all chambers, both all members of Congress to do better. So in each congregation is going to be quite different, right? We have red churches, blue churches, and purple churches. And as the UCC, we're a big tent purple church, but we know that changes geographically, and probably where you are. This is, my guess is many of your churches are, lean a little bit more progressive. So I think in this moment, I think there is a greater urgency. And so the tone, the tenor is changing, but our values do not change, right? We have the same values as Abigail articulated back from our very start, and the resolutions we've passed, through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s to now, has been a values of love, of welcome, of justice. And so that is what we are calling. That is what the voice that we use here in Washington. That's what we encourage our clergy and members to use at the pulpit and at the voting booth and out on the street and in advocacy.
Great, thank you for that. So let's go to Daniel Clark with his question, please. Jackie can. Oh, it's not Daniel. It's
there. No, it's not. He's over there. It's Chris.
Okay. Hi, Chris.
First of all, I want to say that I mean, I like this approach because it's hard because so many of us are so angry. But what we know from research and everything is that it is empathy almost always that will change hearts and minds. So, and that's backed up by studies, that's, you can empathize with people and why they're thinking the way they do. That's how you can change your mind. But it's so hard to empathize with something where the cruelty seems to be the point. And so, I can empathize with people and, I understand why you're, feeling, having trouble with there being so many immigrants and blah, blah, blah. So there's things you can empathize with, but I mean, cutting off Medicaid when people are like lying in bed with tubes. I mean, the cruelty is the point. How do you talk to people about something that's just things that are just beyond empathy?
And just before you answer that, hold that thought. I'm just going to ask everyone's permission. We started 5 minutes late, so I'm going to ask if we can stay till 6:35. If you need to leave earlier, of course, you can just drop off. But thank you, Michael and Abigail, for staying till 6:35. And please go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting question, right? I think we don't need to have empathy for oppressive institutions, right? We can have empathy for our fellow man, regardless of how they voted. But you know, institutions that take away healthcare, that doesn't need our empathy, right? And so I think when it comes to like speaking to people who may have voted for this administration, that doesn't mean that they voted for what this administration is doing now. That doesn't mean that they would vote again for this administration if they knew what they were doing now. And so I think with any of the conversations that you're having, I think you know, remembering that like our righteous anger is towards the institution, not the person, right? I think that is really what it is. I think and what we're seeing here is we're seeing a flawed democracy and a flawed institution, one where yeah, Medicaid could be taken away because of how our Congress is designed. Yes, food stamps could be taken away because of how our Congress is designed. And I think that like making it so that we direct all that righteous anger to the institution and not the person, I think helps. And then the other thing is that I think you know, we have seen that like information, particularly now, is really hard to spread. And so like I really respect you for leading with empathy and providing that information to people that might not have access to that. You know, they might only get their news through social media. They might only get their news through one news station. They might, and that type of isolation that we've seen that's grown over the last decade is something that I know we're really concerned about in the office. And I appreciate everyone here who's trying to fight against those forces.
Yeah. Let me just add one thing, and that is, again, it's as simple as it sounds. We want to counter Project 2025. We want to counter these actions with love. And it's possible for us to begin to dehumanize these politicians, dehumanize members of our family and friends who voted a way we don't agree with. And what we are calling on them to do is to humanize people, humanize immigrants, humanize trans folk. You know, we're calling on them to treat us as humans. So we have to treat them as humans too. Doesn't mean that we can excuse what they're doing or excuse their behavior. But again, we need to counter this with love. And so how do we, you know, it's a little bit of Michelle Obama's when they go low, we go high. There's a simplicity in that I believe in, and that is the high road that we as people of faith can take. That we can absorb some of the hate and counter it with love. And that's the only way we're going to get through this. Is to build bridges, to build more love, and call on each other to treat one another as humans. And that sounds like a really basic bar we shouldn't have to be asking of each other. But man, if we just did that, we'd be in a much better place than we are right now.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm gonna just close this out now with a few announcements. First of all, I want to thank Jackie Lingelbach for her wonderful superstar work on doing all the logistics of getting us to register and getting us on Zoom, and all the advertising she did. And she'll also help us make sure that all of these resources are on our conference website, so that you can have links to everything. Abigail said she'd share her slides with us, and we appreciate that. The recording will also be available, and then all the other documents that have been mentioned in the chat. I also did want to just say quickly that Justice Witness Ministries here at the conference will have 2 more of these webinars. One is on immigration and will be sponsored by Migrant Justice, which is an organization here in Vermont. That's Thursday, March 20th. And then our last one is again focusing on how we can make an impact, and that's on specifically on faith-based community organizing, and that will be led by the staff at Vermont Interfaith Action, which I used to be a part of. That will be on Thursday, April 3rd. So just so much heartfelt thanks to Abigail and to Michael Really appreciate what you've shared with us today. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone that this has been very, very helpful. And we really, really appreciate this.
Great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
All righty. Thanks, everyone. Blessings to you.